Hi, everyone. I've got this started, but we're just going to give it a few more minutes, okay? Welcome.
Bow out about 20 minutes early.
Okay, that's
So it's
fine.
nothing you said.
I'll probably be done by then, too. I can't
Okay.
speak for an hour.
I think I'll open.
Yeah, take as much as you'd like. There's also an info sheet on the chair by the door
Okay.
on the different materials that we have. All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started because it's 3:05. So There's some people online too for you guys in the room. Uh, Welcome. My name is Zoe Calloway. I'm the Vice President of Education at Tax Foundation. And today we are talking about everyone's favorite subject, taxes, which is obviously a joke. Most of us don't like to talk about or even think about taxes. However, it is filing season, so don't forget that the deadline is the 15th. And this session is going to cover not only why taxes are important to learn about, how they tie into financial literacy, why they're important for your learners, and also why this information is important for you as a taxpayer as well. And the clicker has stopped working. So the Tax Foundation has been around since 1937. We're the world's leading nonpartisan tax policy think tank. Our mission is to improve lives through tax policies that lead to greater economic growth and opportunity. I'm just one part of this team. We have many experts on staff that cover state taxes, federal taxes, and global taxes. Personally, I run our educational platform, TaxEDU, is what you're here to hear about today. TaxEDU is designed for everyone. The nature of the situation is that most people don't understand basics about taxes and tax policy. And so our audience spans all the way from high school learners all the way up to legislative staff. And all of our resources are completely free for anyone looking to boost their tax knowledge. And you can see here just different audiences that we have and have expanded. This started in 2021, and so we're still kind of in a growth and marketing phase, letting people know that we exist, and everything that we offer is completely free and available to you. So let's talk taxes. How many in the session enjoy talking about taxes or thinking about them? One half hand. That's more than I would expect. I surely didn't like talking about taxes or thinking about them until I got into a master's program in policy when I started to realize all the things that my classmates really focused on and were interested in kind of determined, you know, you had to have funding. Fiscal policy was critical for any success in any other area that we had, and a big part of that was taxation, and that's how I personally got into it. Still wouldn't say that they're necessarily fun. I'm learning new things every single day at work, and I've been there for 4 years, and there's definitely more to learn. And so you're here to learn, obviously, but as with any education, it all works through building blocks. So if you don't have the foundation information to learn something, you actually cannot retain the new information if you don't have something existing to build that upon. And for most people, there's no basic tax education that we've had in the classroom. So the joke in my generation, I'm right on the cusp between millennial and Gen Z. Our joke on the internet is, I know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but nobody taught me anything about taxes. And so to start to learn about them, you really truly have to start with the absolute basics because there's so many misunderstandings even at that level. We're likely to learn as we go for most people because we are lacking this basic tax education. And that means when you get your first paycheck, you're kind of shocked. You're asking yourself, who is FICA? Why are they taking all of my money? I thought I was going to make this much. And then you go to the store. And if you're in a state with a sales tax, why doesn't what I thought would cover this purchase anymore? That was my personal first experience with taxes. I'm from Delaware. We don't have a sales tax, but I'm right on the Maryland border where there was a 6% sales tax. And I distinctly remember as a little kid being given $1 by my dad. We had clearly forgotten we had crossed over into Maryland, going into a grocery store, trying to get an Arizona iced tea where it says 99 cents printed directly on the can, so it should cost 99 cents. And then being disappointed at the counter that I actually did not have enough money to buy that can of tea because of the tax on it. And that's shocking. I think I might have been 6 years old. No one had told me about taxes at that point. Obviously, why would you? I was more focused on trying to skateboard and play with Polly Pockets, but it was kind of a shock when I naturally encountered it in the real world. A shock again when I got my first paycheck. I was slightly prepared for that at least. And then now as an adult, when I moved to Virginia, the shocks keep coming where there's a property tax on vehicles, which did not exist back home, and changed my perspective of buying myself a new car for my 30th birthday, and now saying that'll have to be a nice used car to reduce my property tax bill I'll owe annually on that vehicle. So it really does start with the bottom. And honestly, more simple than you would think it should be. We really have to start with what is a tax. So does anyone want to venture to guess what is a tax and what that definition would be? So we have someone in person here that said a percentage of something, which true, it is part of it. So that's a tax rate. Right. So raising government revenues is the purpose of a tax for sure. That is the only purpose of a tax in nature. They are used for other things, but by definition, the purpose is to raise money for government revenues. And that actually starts at the local level all the way up through state, federal, and there are global taxes, which is too complicated for this session today. Don't worry about it. And there are differences between things that might feel like a tax that do raise government revenue, like a user fee, but that's not a tax. So fees, fines, those are not the same as a tax, even though they serve the same purpose. There's a difference in how they're administered. So what is a tax? A tax is a mandatory payment or charge collected by local, state, and national governments from individuals or businesses to cover the cost of general government services, goods, and activities. They've been around for over 5,000 years. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. Many of the taxes you know today have been around for that long. So income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, estate taxes, these have been around for many, many years. They're not fun to think about, but everyone's had to deal with them all the way back to ancient civilization. And as you said, they're the mechanism by which governments can pay for their goods and services that they provide. So, in what ways do taxes play a role in your personal finances? How have you guys seen them beyond a sales tax and an income tax? Yeah, in your budget for sure. So the true answer here is that they play a role in almost every aspect of your personal finances, whether it's budgeting, saving, investing, selling something. Taxes apply in all of these scenarios. It is dependent on where you're living, what the rate would be if you have that tax, etc. But trust me, if you're missing one tax in your state, it's being made up for with a different tax. So every decision that you're making with personal finances, if you're not including taxes, you're really truly missing a big piece of the puzzle here. So this is a list of different things that are affected by taxes, even some things that we might not think about, like housing decisions. How high are property taxes in the area that you're going to? Are there assessment or levy limits, which does make it even more complicated because taxes are not simple. And that is how much can your property tax go up each year. There's limits on that so that they don't really get out of hand in some jurisdictions, and others, there's not. Your property tax could increase every year with no restriction. Also, employment decisions. If you don't understand how taxes work, you might not take a promotion thinking that you're going to lose money with this higher income. It can also determine just in general broader where you want to live for state taxes and etc. Like I loved living in Delaware for no sales tax. That was fantastic. It didn't necessarily change my decision to move out. I just wanted to leave home, but I won't say I don't miss it. I can't lie to you. And I go home to visit my parents. That's when I make my Walmart trip, just so I don't have to pay a sales tax on my bulk items. So they really go through everything, even in ways that you might not think to think about taxes, even with our 401ks. There's different ways to save for retirement that have taxes that apply or don't apply. And why is this information important? I think we can all agree here that it's pretty clear. We don't have to even bring up the data that most people don't understand how taxes work. That's why I have a job. But we did conduct a national tax literacy poll last year that found that more than half of American taxpayers over the age of 18 do not understand or are unsure of basic tax concepts. This is true across the board, no matter education level, income level, political affiliation, anything. People just don't understand taxes. And this is something we desperately need to work on because it really impacts our lives in pretty big ways. So you can see some of the data up here on the screen that shows some of the questions that we asked and the answers that we had. And all of these are what we would consider basic tax concepts around income tax filing. And it is tax filing season, so this is pretty timely here. Most people don't understand how tax brackets work. That can change your employment decisions and your budgeting. Some people think that getting a refund is a good thing instead of an interest-free loan to the government that you could have had if your withholding was correct. people talk about tax rates, but most people were unsure of what the actual top tax rate is in the United States for federal income taxes and what the share of the tax burden is when it comes to federal taxes. We had more questions beyond this as well, but it was consistent across every question in our tax literacy portion of the poll that people truly did not understand taxation. Are there any questions on the poll or these questions before I move forward? Okay. So only 2% of all respondents only actually had proficient tax knowledge where they answered the majority of those questions correct. 2%. And it was a pretty large sample size. So this is pretty representative of the American population. So it truly shows just how much work there is left to do. And that's where you guys can come in, and your education is to help boost tax literacy amongst adult taxpayers. Yes.
Interesting. Right. See,
Yeah. So we don't have, someone in the audience asked if we have a test online where you could take the questions here for yourself and see how much you know. We don't have it in test form, but we do have it published, and I have the link in the Hoover app under this session. The results of our poll at the end in the appendix, all of the questions are listed. So you can go ahead and take the test there. The answers are not listed, but we have another report on the poll that answers some of those questions for you. Yeah, I'll make the slides available as well for this. So there was a correlation between higher earnings and higher educational attainment and people performing better on this section of the poll, but however, the proficiency was still incredibly low. So while there was better performance in this section, at the end of the day, people still really struggle with tax knowledge at any level. And in addition to this, we also gauge the perceptions of the tax code to see if there's a correlation between understanding taxes and how we feel about them, because taxes and money bring up a lot of feelings, right? Anger when you owe more than you think that you did, excitement when you get a big refund, confusion when you enter a new tax bracket. It really impacts our lives, and it also impacts our decision making and how we feel generally about the tax code. And more than 80% of our respondents thought that the tax code was in need of reform, and most respondents also think that it's not fair. And we had another question as well that asked if it was too complex, and the majority of respondents also said yes. And I think we can all agree with that. That's why there's a session on this today, because there's just too much to think about. There's too many levels of government levying taxes. There's too many different taxes that they levy, and they change every year. There's no stability in it either. So when you think you've caught up, there's something more to learn too. So I'll ask you a question from the survey so we can do the quiz here. Suppose your income places you in the 22% bracket. How much of your income do you think is taxed at that rate? Just some of it or all of it? Raise your hand if you think just some of it. Okay, so we have 3 correct answers in person. I don't know how to do a raised hand in here, so if you want to drop that in the chat online, that would be better. Apologies for that. Or if you're raising your hand to say it. So that's the right answer, just some of it. And I'll tell a funny story here because of just how important this is. A very good friend of mine teaches AP calculus for high school, right? She's a very bright woman. She's got it pretty down pat. She's great at math, which is tangential to this, right? On the day we started producing a video on how tax brackets work, she texted me freaking out that she got a promotion and it moved her from the 12% to the 22% tax bracket, and that she was going to lose money. How could this happen? She's texting me because she's like, why do taxes work like this? Why am I being punished for doing a better job? And I felt terrible. And I said, you'll never believe this. That's not how taxes work. I'm actually making a video on that like today, starting today. Take the promotion. Don't ruin your life. Please take the promotion. You will make more money. It's okay. And that's just how important understanding this is, because she would have had to move back home, move away from her friends, would have lost this job just from misunderstanding taxes. Her whole life would have changed. And it's shocking to see this. And when I've presented at other conferences on this, I've met teachers that teach high school personal finance who have said, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I've been teaching this wrong for 20 years. I didn't know that's how tax brackets worked either. So we all have more to learn about it. I also embarrassingly did not know this until I worked at Tax Foundation. I worked with tax policy, but that never touched on brackets. And I always just came up with a percentage that felt kind of right to times my income by to do my budgeting without understanding why that percentage felt right for how many taxes I was having taken out. But don't worry, we're here to learn about it. We have more information on how that works. So I'm going to show you a quick video. This is an example of a product that we have completely free on our website. You can use in your classroom. I encourage you to do so. All of our videos are under 2 minutes long and try to explain everything as simple as possible. And they range from topics like this on how tax brackets work, all the way up to why tariffs are taxes and how tariffs work, which is very important today with everything going on. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. And if you weren't sure how tax brackets work, hopefully after this, we'll all be on the same page.
Pop quiz. Do you know what tax bracket you're in? If you answered it depends, well, you're right, because parts of your income are probably taxed at different rates. Say you have $50,000 in taxable income. Today, that dollar amount lands within the 22% bracket. But that doesn't mean you pay that rate on the full $50,000. Let's explain. In the US, your federal income tax is calculated through a progressive, graduated rate system. Basically, if you make more, you're taxed more. Right now, we have 7 tax brackets. Each bracket covers a range of taxable income, and the rate for each bracket gets progressively higher. Any income within the range of the first bracket is taxed at that rate. The next dollar you earn over the first bracket falls into the second bracket, and only those additional dollars within that range are taxed at the new rate. This continues as your taxable income increases. So in our $50,000 example, this much gets taxed at 10%, only this much gets taxed at 12%, and only this much gets taxed at 22%. As you can see, whatever your top tax rate is, it doesn't apply to all of your taxable income, just the portion that falls into your highest bracket. When we understand how brackets work, we can better understand the tax impact of picking up a second job, putting in overtime, or any other ways we might increase our income.
And one thing I was interested in is why is the jump so large from 2 to 3, and then even like you can get pretty wealthy and it isn't even as big. Well, I guess it's you can get pretty rich before it's that big of a jump.
Right.
Curious about that.
So the question in the audience was, why is the jump between the lower tax brackets so big compared to the higher brackets? And my answer is, I wish I had a good answer for you. Congress sets it. Does Congress do much things that make sense? Probably not. But these brackets have been consistent with the rate side of it for a while. They do change every year how much income falls within each bracket, but these rates have been pretty consistent. So they decided that however many years ago. I was still in college, high school when these became the rates, and that's just been that. So I don't have a good answer on that. I wish I did, but the important thing is to make sure that you're checking up every year on if your income still falls within certain brackets, because that will change your tax burden. What I have on the screen right now is 2024 tax brackets, and I know we're in 2025, but this is the rate that's applying to what you're filing before this April 15th in 2 weeks. So these are the rates that will apply when you're filing your taxes in 2025. On our website as well, if you just search up tax brackets and you go to this page here, that this is from. We have it for years previous and upcoming years where you can click and see the brackets, the credits and deductions, the capital gains tax rates, all of that that will apply for future filing seasons. So we do have 2025 brackets up and 2026 brackets up, which will cover the next 2 years of tax filing, just so you can be prepared and look ahead. Yeah. The income that falls within each percentage goes up each year. They keep raising like what amount falls in each bracket, but the rates have remained the same for many years. So as you see here where it says 10% rate goes up to $11,600, that would have been like 10,000 some the year before. So that's how it moves up, is the amount of income that falls within each bracket increases each year usually. Yeah. So sadly, the answer is no. There are ones that can estimate for you, but the problem here is that there's different credits and deductions that apply. Your employer decides your withholding, which changes how much is actually being taken out for you. So you could take a calculator for this rate and figure out like what average rate is applying to your income. It probably won't reflect what you've actually withheld that year. It's almost never accurate, your withholding. That's why you usually owe or get a return. Again, yeah, I see the frustration. It's right. So if you're still owing money, that's because you're under withholding. And so that's something that you do have the ability to go to your employer and say, I would like to adjust my withholding because your employer withholds some taxes for you, right, that they owe to the government. And then you also, they withhold for you that you will owe. And so it's definitely worth going to whoever your HR person is and saying, I want to adjust my withholding I owe every year. And that would help. So if you raise your withholding, then you might be even and have no refund or no owing, or you might get a tax return. But again, a tax return is nothing to celebrate. It also represents that you're not withholding properly. You over withheld an interest free loan to the government all year. That is money that could have been in your pocket earning interest in an investment or something like that. So it feels nice to get a tax return, a tax refund, but in reality, it's not good for our own personal finances.
I put my bag, they out send me money and they take longer to show. Well, I have some kind of interest as well, or
Yeah, so the question was that if we owe interest to the government, if we take a while, but they take a while, can they pay us interest? And sadly, no, it's the government. So it would be nice, right? But we don't have that power currently. That's a whole different civics conversation I won't get into today, but it would be nice. Yes. Yeah. Right. And while that's an answer, it doesn't feel logical, right? Like, obviously, we're creating ease on lower income individuals. That's why it's a progressive rate structure. But that jump on the middle class, it's still hard on middle class finances as well. And you would still hopefully expect to see a bigger jump in the upper brackets where that feels like maybe they could handle it better, but they do pay the majority of tax. That's different opinions. Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah. Right. I think it just depends. And it is interesting that it's this big jump. And obviously, there's more credits and deductions and exemptions available for people in the lower brackets, which is good. But it is interesting that the percentages are so small at the top when they're big jumps like that throughout the rest of the brackets. But it is still hard on the middle class. Hmm. Yeah. So we have resources on that too. So in the audience, we had someone say the upper earners are probably creating jobs, and Congress is considering that. Something not the same but close that we have resources on is on like common tax misconceptions, and one would be that large corporations pay no income tax or they're using tax loopholes, and that's like a media talking point. But when you're understanding taxes, these are they are able to pay. Most don't pay zero. Almost none pay zero. They are paying something, but the provisions are purposely set in the tax code that allow them to have more credits and exemptions, and that's to support things like research and development, which lead to new vaccine developments or new technology. Like they're established in the tax code. It's not somebody sitting at the business being like, how can we avoid every tax? Congress decided to allow it. However, your opinion is on that, that's fine, but it's not loopholes that they're finding. And yeah. And for example of that, she said there's not much that we understand in the tax code. What I'm talking about, if I were to say bonus depreciation to you guys, how many of you in here would know what I'm talking about? Exactly. And that's one of those provisions where it allows for like a tax break for corporations, but it's a very important part of the tax code. And most people don't know about it. It's also known as full expensing, which you guys also might not know what full expensing is. And that's why it's just so complicated. And I wish it would be easier. It's one of our 4 principles of sound tax policy is simplicity. Maybe one day we'll get there. That's what we're fighting for at Tax Foundation. Simplicity, stability, transparency, and neutrality. But we can just do our best. He was first, and then I'll go to you. Hmm.
And so other than, getting on a payment plan with the IRS, is there any other recourse I have?
So I'm legally not allowed to give tax advice for how we're registered, but I will say that's not great for the impact that that has. And I'm sorry that you're facing that situation. I would talk to someone who works in tax, like a CPA, who can legally give tax advice. That would be helpful.
Payment plan.
Yeah.
I figured it was.
But the onus for that should be on your employer, not on you. For sure. What it's an odd decision. I'm so sorry that you're dealing with that. Oh, mm-hmm. Yeah. Good luck. Right. Because if you see your paycheck's too big and you're like, oh, that looks wrong because I know I should be having taxes taken out, knowing what taxes should be taken out can help you put that in like a separate account maybe throughout the year to be prepared to pay rather than having some big tax bill at filing. Good luck. I'm so sorry. And you had a question as well? So before I answer, I'm gonna be clear that this is not advice. I'm defining something. So a single filer would have no dependents. A head of household has dependents. Yep. Yeah, of course. Yes. So if you want to look at this later, I know it's tax filing season and it'll come up again in another year and the year after that forever and ever until we die. You know, we all know the saying, only thing certain are taxes and death. You can go on our website and we update it pretty early. Like I said, we already have 2026 brackets up that you would file in 2027. So you can be as prepared as possible. This is just federal. There's state income taxes too. Again, layers of taxation. Most states also have this structure, so this is good to understand, but some states do have a flat tax where there's one rate applied to everyone, no matter your income level. Those do not usually feature credits, exemptions, and deductions. It is only the tax rate. You have nothing else to play around with there. And some have no income tax, but don't be fooled. It's a high property tax, a high sales tax, a high corporate income tax to make up for it. So just something to be aware of. And we do have maps here on the table for you for income tax rates by state. There's updated versions of this online, and I'll show some at the end of the presentation. Yeah, you got to keep up with both. So how can you boost tax literacy? You're here because you're educating adult learners, maybe English language learners, new citizens. This is really important, especially because nobody's learning it. I mean, high schoolers now are super lucky that there's this huge movement nationwide for personal finance education as a graduation requirement. But for adult learners, you got to make sure somehow that they're still getting this information. It impacts them even more. I mean, homes, families to take care of, bigger purchases that would have taxes apply to them. This is critical information for them to be successful, especially with workforce preparedment, budgeting, etc. And there's always an opportunity to talk about them no matter what you're teaching for adult learners. You can cover them in personal finance, civics, economics, history, business, policy, on and on and on. And I really encourage you all to take the opportunity to do so. We have resources that cover all of these topic areas. Any way that you can start introducing this just to make people more familiar, that first building block, take the opportunity because it's going to help them in the long run be able to prepare to receive more information about the plethora of taxes that they could encounter. So how can you get started with this? The most basic thing that we offer is a glossary. So this is for your students and this is for you. If you see something going on, your state's proposing a new tax, you're just trying to figure out what it means and when you might encounter it or present it to your students, I'd start with our glossary. We have over 115 glossary terms that are tax focused, econ focused, things we've never heard of. So for example, how many of you in here know what inflation means? Okay. How many of you in here know what bracket creep is though? Bracket creep. So this is why our glossary is so important. We're aware of inflation. We know how it impacts our wallets. We hear it talked about in the media. I've never once heard the media talk about bracket creep. And that is when, because of inflation and its impact on the value of a dollar, your tax burden actually goes up. It shifts your tax liability because of how the brackets would apply to the value of the income, the increase in cost of goods, etc. Something that should be talked about because you're at the store thinking this costs more, but then it also impacts your taxes. And that's a whole other layer that we're forgetting. So we have terms, from that. We also have terms as simple as what is a tax, all the different names it might go by. So you know how to recognize it when you see it, a duty, imposition, assessment, levy, scrutage. All of these are taxes, but a user fee isn't and a fine isn't. And so we cover that as well. Yes.
Some of those terms, like, you know, in that tax bracket or whatever that was.
Bracket creep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Do your own taxes and how it-
So the question in the room was, are there specific lessons based on income level and how it would apply? No, because most of the things that we cover do apply to everyone. And if they don't, we do clarify in our talking about it of this mainly impacts low income earners versus high income earners. These are the different impacts. For example, with a standard deduction versus itemized deduction, when we talk about that, we do highlight, only the top earners, or if your taxes are super complicated, might you want to do an itemized deduction. For everyone else, standard deduction is what you'll take. And so we do clarify that in our stuff. And I will say for lessons generally, we have resources currently to build a lesson. Later this year, early next year, we are putting out specific lesson modules that will be focused on topic. So there will be like an income tax filing topic lesson, a property tax lesson, etc. So we're just working on getting those up on the website. Yes. hmm Military does have different taxes with certain things. And again, taxes are very complicated. So we have a podcast episode on this. I would say the most complicated military thing when it comes to taxes is for citizens that live abroad and how they're taxed. That's a whole different complication, right? Like you're still a US citizen, you're paying taxes wherever you're living abroad. You still owe US taxes as well. And so that's probably the most important difference with military would be facing that. Yes. So you can get started with glossary terms. Again, they're for you, they're for the classroom. We also have videos. I showed you the video on how tax brackets work. We have 14 videos currently we put out for a year. Our next is on property taxes and assessment limits and levy limits, which again is something that you probably don't think about until you face it. But they do cover different areas too, like how do governments raise revenue when you're thinking about civics and things like that. tariffs, simplicity in the tax code, etc. So definitely go and check those out. They're all under 2 minutes long. They make it as simple as possible for any of these topics. And for most of them, there's a primer that goes along with it. So we started by building videos off of our primers. These are a good in-class or take-home readings that you can print out and give to someone. Also for you to check out, for example, common tax questions answered. There's also one about tax misconceptions, the weird ways taxes impact behavior. So these are great for, basic tax education to really put that into a classroom. They're available for PDF download, and again, everything is free, so you can just go on our website, hit download and print, and that's completely available to you. So when you put it all together to build a lesson, this is kind of what this could look like. So if you were to build a lesson on the 3 basic tax types, introducing taxes to your adult learners, which I'm sure they've already encountered taxes, but this is different. We're going to learn about them right from the core. There's a video, there's a primer that goes along with it. These are all the glossary terms that apply to that. And that would pretty much cover at least a 60-minute lesson just with this information to run through all of this to cover what are the 3 basic tax types, when might you encounter them, what are the ones that you're most likely to see, pull a map from our state team and say, this is what these taxes look like in our state, compare them to neighboring states, talk about what economic decisions that might lead to, and you have a complete tax lesson right there. So we have everything available to put it together for you to plug and play, or if you only have the opportunity to include a little bit of taxes in a different lesson, then go ahead and show a video or use a glossary term, and that's good too. We also have the short form blog. I love my coworkers. They're so smart. I have much respect for the work that they do. Normal people would never understand what they're talking about. I don't understand what they're talking about. Sometimes when it comes to global taxes, I'm like, okay. So the job with the short form is, how do we make normal people understand what we're talking about with things happening in taxation? So some of them are really fun, like the Barbie movie when it came out. We did Let Me Tell You About Taxes, and it was what taxes might Barbie face when she enters the real world. And so that's establishing that connection where someone might be interested in pop culture like that, but have no care about taxes, and that builds that building block connection for them to then dive into taxation. We also have more serious ones that are still easy to understand, like rethinking tax refunds, where it goes into explaining why you shouldn't be excited to get a refund and what this means, and how the tax cuts and jobs could impact you. That one I highly encourage checking out. That's expiring this year. And if the provisions are allowed to expire, individuals will see $1,000 to a couple $1,000 increase in their tax bill every year. So this is happening right now in Congress. I can tell by your face, this is a shock. Most people aren't talking about it, right? I work with tax wonks, so we're talking about the TCJA expiring every day. And reading this short form just walks through, what is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? Why should you care about it? How will this impact you if the provisions expire versus if any of them are extended? The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, so most of the federal tax code. And there's even a glossary term for TCJA, so you can go into that too and dive into it. But all of this, again, free, available on the website. Definitely important to dive into because all of this is real. It's happening. It impacts us directly. And like I said, while I love my coworkers and they do a great job, starting with one of their pieces that has an equation in the first sentence might not be where we want to start. But we can start with one of these, and then as we're starting to grasp the concepts, move into one of their higher level blogs with the data and the graphs and the charts and all of this that's going on that they're so fantastic at doing. And again, tax literacy is for you too. I really encourage you to think beyond the classroom with this. If you have kids, start talking to them about taxes so that they're prepared. Please look into your own tax stuff that's going on, become familiar with it. This is for everybody. Like I said earlier with the National Tax Literacy Poll, most people do not understand taxation. I just did a 3-day classroom training on Capitol Hill for the people who are working on the federal tax code to teach them about the federal tax code. So it really is across the board. People do not understand what's going on, and you can be above the mean here in knowing what's going on with taxes and be prepared with your own personal finances. So like I've already mentioned before, we have information on the tax brackets. We have videos on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn about what's the difference between a credit and a deduction. And there's so much more. It's really easy to dive into, and we set it up so that you can navigate through. If you're starting on one and you say, well, I don't know what that means in this definition, you can hover over it and it'll show you the definition for that term too. So we try to make it as easy as possible to navigate. This is not on Tax EDU, but I will highlight the great work that our state team does. So this is one of the maps that we have here in person as well. This is really great for the classroom and for you too, to understand what tax rates are applying in your real life based on your location, because state taxes are a thing that I think we tend to forget. Federal taxes, you know, get the big play in the media. There's tax filing season, but there are so many state taxes too, and they span from taxes on vape products, alcohol, tobacco, to property, sales taxes, income tax rates. There's so many. I think we release 30 maps a year just on state taxes. So this is one example on individual income tax rates. Again, I have the 2024 map up because these are the rates that will apply this filing season. And then this is also a sales tax map. So when you're making purchases, you can understand how much you might be paying in addition. If you want to make a big purchase, say you need a new couch, is it going to be $6,000 or is it going to be $6,000 plus 6%, depending on where you live? So these are important. It's great. If you go on our website on taxfoundation.org, you'll see a tab that says data. And under that, you'll see state tax maps. And you can go there. They're all separated out by category. You can see previous years and current maps that are out. And that's what I'm looking to cover today. Does anyone have any questions about Tax EDU, Tax Foundation, taxes in general? Yeah, so the TCJA is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It was the 2017 tax policy that was put in that changed the federal tax code. A lot of the media coverage on it is what it did with corporate income taxes, but it did also impact individual income taxes. Good if you want to save money on your tax bill. And if these provisions are allowed to expire for individuals, your tax bill will increase the very next year. So your tax bill will go up. You will owe more in taxes if these provisions expire. If the code, the tax policy that's in now from it that was put in 2017 is allowed to expire this year, like it's set to, your taxes will go up at the federal level. So something to keep aware of, because it does go beyond your brackets and your own personal finance decisions. Congress impacts your taxes too. So that's happening literally right now. Our federal team is focused pretty much solely on tariffs and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act at this point in time. Yeah. So the question was, why do some states have higher tax rates? It depends on government priorities. What do they need to fund? Right? But also to make up for other taxes. So in Texas, for example, there's no income tax. That has to be made up somewhere else, right? So property taxes are going to be higher. Eventually, a sales tax might go up because government needs revenue. But if you're missing an entire tax type, then that money has to be generated somewhere else. And that causes higher rates in those other taxes. And a different example, in my home state, again, Delaware, we have no sales tax. The only reason that we have that is because of we have a chancery court, which is like a business court, business tax court. And there's a provision set up there that if the CEO does something bad, they cannot get in trouble themselves personally. So that is why so many major corporations headquarter in Delaware, to protect the owner of the business. And so from corporate income tax collections, because we have the highest corporate income tax in the nation, but people still want to headquarter there, even paying that because they can be okay in the court, we don't need a sales tax, right? However, the court this year ruled against a major company, and 3 major companies are leaving the state, costing, I think, close to $1 billion. And Delaware, if you're not aware, has 3 counties. It's a very tiny state. There's less than 1 million people that live there. And so now they're talking about if we need a sales tax just from a court decision. So taxes do have to balance, right? Mm-hmm. 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 So this question is asking if the government checks themselves on how much they're going to tax people, right? Because I mean, if they wanted to, government could just put the highest taxes possible, make all the money that they want. But at the end of the day, if people have no money left because you're taking it all away, you're going to lose tax revenue, right? Because people aren't going to be able to make purchases. They're not going to be able to save and invest. It's not good policy. It doesn't mean that some governments don't do that. It's really just up to the government itself where that balancing point is. We have to have taxes, but there is a sweet spot in how we tax that raises enough revenue for the government with the least amount of economic harm. And that's what we promote at our organization is how can we design a policy that burdens taxpayers the least while also raising the most revenue. And part of that, a different basic tax concept topic is the rate versus the base. So this whole presentation, we talked about rates, right? Like the percentage that applies when you're being taxed. But there's also the base to consider, which is what activities are being taxed. And if you expand the base, you can have a lower rate and raise more revenue because there's more things being taxed, even though the rate they're taxed at is lower. And so that's least harmful for the taxpayers and generates more revenue because if more things are being taxed, even with a lower rate, you can generate more revenue. So again, taxes are very complicated because we usually just think of the rate, but when you consider the base as well, that can really change the impact on both sides. Yeah. Yes, the government is in control of that. And so the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is another example of that, actually. So the media only talked about the corporate rate. They lowered the corporate rate, they're giving corporations a big tax break, but they almost never talked about how it also expanded the base of how much things that corporations could be taxed for. It actually increased government revenue because while they did lower the rate, they expanded the base. And so it wasn't that corporations were like getting off scot-free with this. More activities that they were doing were being taxed. And that was a decision by the government of which is better for us to do, get more money through expanding what we can tax them on or just taxing them at a higher rate. And they decided that expanding the base was better. It's a lot. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, because if you're taxing businesses more, and it's not just corporations, there's small businesses that are taxed as individuals. They are applicable to the individual income tax. And those are usually small businesses, right? If you're taxing them higher, then that leaves less profit because more money's going to taxes, less job creation. Mm, okay. Yeah, so good that you're keeping up with that. Yes. So the question in the room was, is there a comparison chart between how much we tax versus other countries? And the answer is yes. Our global team puts that out. We don't do it globally. We do it comparing OECD countries because they operate under similar economic structures. Yes, on our website, you can see what the different sources of revenue are between the United States and OECD countries, and you can also see the difference in rates as well. So that would be under global data. And it's fun to play through our website, navigate. If you're looking for tax CDU, obviously that's under the education tab. Everything else, I would go under data, research, blog. Yes. Hmm. Yeah. There's so many different taxes that it's easy to hear someone talk and say, oh, this corporation paid nothing in taxes this year. They paid nothing in that one tax that they're talking about, maybe, and it's also still probably not nothing, but they paid so much in some other tax because there's multiple different types of taxes that apply to corporations, just like how we pay multiple different types of taxes too. Yes, and even globally too. So there's something called the OECD Global Tax Deal, and there is a part of that that establishes a minimum tax on global corporations so that people couldn't do tax avoidance, right? So corporations couldn't go and headquarter in Ireland to do tax evasion. It would now be that it's a global requirement that all countries must tax multinational corporations at a minimum of 15%. And if they're not, then whatever that gap is between what they actually paid and 15%, that tax then is applied to them at the end of their filing so that they do pay 15%. So globally, they're trying to make sure that everyone is paying their fair share, right, and collecting the taxes, no tax evasion. So there's an effort being made worldwide to establish that. Yeah. And I have my information up here on the screen. You can follow us on Twitter at TaxEDU. We always post our new resources, existing resources. Instagram and YouTube are just Tax Foundation itself's pages, but there are TaxEDU things on that as well. We'll be probably releasing a TikTok soon, so keep an eye out for that if that's something you're interested in. It won't be dancing videos, it will be me talking about taxes. Yeah, I won't embarrass myself like that, I promise. I don't think anybody would want me to do both. But yeah, and this is my email as well. I was hired to start the program. I just finally got help after a couple of years. So if you shoot me an email, if you see that we're missing something that you want to talk about, I can get that in the production schedule. Happy to help, happy to answer questions. Very passionate about this. If you're in the room, there's business cards, yep, on the table. There's maps. We have holographic stickers of our logo. Take as many as you would like. The orange booklet is facts and figures. That is from our state team. So that's all of the data that our state tax maps are created from in one booklet. And then there's another booklet that just kind of talks about the tax landscape and how it's changing if you want a broader view of taxes in the United States. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap the session early and end it online. Thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully we all learned something more about taxes today. I'm originally from Delaware. I live in Virginia right now.